She buried her husband young, raised 3 mouths alone, and taught herself not to hope. Then one dust-choked evening, the man who left them all behind rode into town, and not for forgiveness. They heard the horse before they saw it, just one, steady gait. Boots hit the earth before the dust even cleared. Ruth Avery didn't lift her eyes from the flour sack she was tying shut behind the counter, didn't need to. She knew that rhythm, that silence between steps. That way the door didn't creak, it groaned, like it remembered the man who once opened it like he owned the place. She tightened the knot on the sack until her knuckles blanched white. Her heart didn't race, it didn't stutter, it stopped, then started again, slower, meaner. She turned before he could speak. "Didn't think they let ghosts ride into town in broad daylight," she said. Samuel Avery stood in the doorway like a man who still believed he belonged somewhere. Same sun-dark skin, same jaw that looked carved from pride, same eyes that had once softened when they looked at her, now dulled, empty. A faded red bandana hung from his neck, the same one she'd stitched years ago when he was riding trail for the army. His coat was newer. So were his boots, but not his silence. He tipped his hat like they hadn't spent a decade pretending the other didn't exist. Ruth. Behind her in the back of the dry goods store, a pot clanged. Caleb Avery, 13 now, sharp as a coiled whip and twice as fast to strike, leaned out from the storeroom, his hands still dusted in cornmeal. His face was unreadable, but the muscles in his jaw worked like he was chewing rocks. Beside him, Jonah, 10, quieter but harder to fool, took one step forward before Ruth held a hand out. "Go help your sister." "Ma. Now." They disappeared into the back and Ruth finally met Samuel's eyes. Her voice was lower now, colder. "You need something." Samuel didn't speak at first. Just looked around the store like he could still see it the way it had been, shelves half full, light always slanting the wrong way. Back when he used to run his fingers along the edge of the counter while he talked about leaving, about a life beyond fences and children and war widows who couldn't forget what the world had taken. Back before he left her a widow too, even if the law never called her that. "I heard about Mary," he said finally, "that she passed." Ruth's throat burned. Her mother had died last spring, quiet and slow, bones hollowed by time. She had held Ruth's hand on the last night and whispered, "Don't you ever wait for a man who don't look back." Ruth hadn't cried then. She didn't now. "You didn't come back for her funeral, or to help bury her, so don't speak her name like you earned the right." Samuel flinched barely, but she caught it. She saw the lie he bit back before swallowing it whole. "I didn't know," he muttered. "You didn't want to." The bell over the door chimed again. A customer this time, a neighbor, old Miss Cartwright from the edge of town. Ruth moved smoothly, collecting herself, greeting the woman with a practiced smile and a cloth-wrapped wedge of soap. Samuel didn't speak, didn't move, just waited. When Miss Cartwright left, Ruth turned back to him and said, "You're not here for Mary, you're not here for me, so who is it?" His silence answered. "You don't get to see them," she said. "I never asked." "You never had to. I know how your kind thinks. You want to ride in, say your piece, maybe show them a knife trick or a coin behind the ear, then ride off like it was a visit instead of abandonment." "I didn't abandon." "Did." Her voice cracked sharp across the wood floor, cutting through the stillness like gunfire. "Don't you dare tell yourself any story where you were the hero. I raised them, me. Mary helped until she couldn't, and when she passed it was just me. While you played outlaw or whatever fool game you thought was worth more than your children, I was teaching Caleb how to read and shoot. Jonah's the one with a cough, but I bet you didn't know that. And Clara, she don't even remember your face. That's the mercy of it." He looked like she'd hit him, but Ruth didn't back off. She couldn't. Not when the ground still trembled beneath her from all the nights she'd spent pacing with crying babies and no milk. Not when every scar she bore had been earned through blood, not just skin but soul. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Samuel looked down. When he raised his eyes again, something in them had changed. Not softened, just bent under some weight she couldn't yet name. "There's men coming," he said finally. "3 days behind me, maybe 2. They want what I took. They won't care who's in the way." Ruth didn't move. "What did you take?" His jaw clenched. "Gold, but it ain't the gold they're after now, it's blood." Ruth stared at him for a long time, long enough to feel the wind shift through the cracks in the wood, long enough for the noise in the back to go still, her boys listening. "You brought danger to my children. I'm trying to stop it from reaching them. You think that means a damn thing to me. You think I care if you're sorry now. I don't expect you to care about me." "No," she said, voice flat, "but you should care what I do next." She walked past him and slammed the store door shut, locked it, drew the curtain, turned the sign to closed. Then she said, without turning around, "You've got 5 minutes to explain exactly what you stole, who's chasing you, and how much danger my family is in. If you lie to me, I'll know, and I'll put you back on your horse with a bullet in your leg." Samuel didn't protest. He sat. Outside, the wind began to rise. Not a storm yet, but something was coming. And this time, Ruth wouldn't be the one left behind. The moment Samuel sat down, Ruth crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, eyes fixed, expression carved from granite. The ticking of the old mantel clock filled the store, loud as footsteps in a church. The children remained silent in the back, but she could feel them listening. They were always listening. Samuel took off his hat slowly and set it on his knee. "I didn't steal it the way you think," he began. "Not from a bank, not from no family neither. It was in a mine up near the San Carlos Ridge. Forgotten vein, years dried up, or so they claimed. But I saw glint in that wall, took my share. That's all." "Your share of what?" Ruth asked, voice low and hard. "Blood pay, from a gang I was running with. I didn't know who they were at first, met 'em while drifting cattle for a man who never paid. They were slick. Called themselves the Red Valley Boys, said they didn't need me to shoot, just ride, haul gear, scout paths. I thought I was buying time until I figured out my next move." He paused. "But then I saw what they did to a man who tried to leave. No warnings, just strung him up and rode on." "So you rode with killers," Ruth said, fury rising in her throat. "I rode with ghosts. They didn't leave tracks, didn't stay in towns. I don't know how many they buried behind them, but I know they didn't forget faces. That gold, I took it to get out, to disappear." "You should have disappeared farther." "I tried." He sounded older now, like something inside him had gone threadbare. Ruth had no sympathy left for his wear. Not yet. Not when her heart still beat in protective rhythm for 3 children he'd never bothered to meet halfway. "How many?" she asked, "coming?" 5, maybe more. Depends if they picked up any hands in Paxton. I rode hard to get ahead of them." "You led them straight here." "I was trying to warn you." She didn't answer that. She walked to the back door and opened it a crack, letting in the faint sound of wind chimes from the porch. Her eyes scanned the dusty street outside, now painted gold in the setting sun. Quiet. Too quiet. Town had a habit of doing that right before trouble came riding through. Behind her, she heard movement, small, deliberate. She turned just as Caleb stepped out from the doorway separating the back of the store from the front. His stance was stiff, protective, his jaw set the way it got when he thought he was grown enough to carry her burdens. "Is it true?" he asked, staring at Samuel. "You're our father." Samuel looked at Ruth first, like waiting for permission. She gave none. "I am," he said. Caleb didn't move, didn't blink. "Then why didn't you come back?" That silence again. That hollow place Samuel always filled with excuses instead of answers. "I was young, stupid," he said quietly. "Thought I had to be more than this, that I could come back after I'd made something of myself." Caleb stepped forward once, fists at his side. "You didn't." "I know." Jonah appeared beside his brother now, thinner and paler, eyes rimmed with worry. He clutched a worn rag doll, not his, but Clara's, like it gave him courage. "Are they coming to hurt us?" "No," Ruth answered before Samuel could open his mouth. No one's coming near this store tonight, or tomorrow, or ever, not while I breathe. Samuel stood. They'll be here by dusk tomorrow, maybe sooner if they press hard. Then we've got hours, Ruth said, already moving. Not days, hours. She turned to her sons. Get Clara, head to the sheriff's office. Tell Frank I sent you. Tell him to gather the posse, 5 men minimum. Bring every badge, every rifle. And you, Caleb asked. I'll be here, she said, watching the road. Samuel watched her with a strange look, admiration twisted with regret. You always were better than me. I had to be. The boys nodded and ran. Ruth turned back to Samuel and opened the cabinet beneath the counter. She pulled out a shotgun, double-barreled, polished but worn, and loaded shells from the small leather pouch tucked inside her apron. She set it gently on the counter like it was an old friend. You said they don't forget faces, she said. They remember mine real well. Good, then they'll recognize the look I give 'em before I pull the trigger. Samuel didn't argue. He reached slowly into his coat and drew a revolver. Clean, well-kept, 6-shot. He checked the chamber and holstered it. You know how to use that? Ruth asked, narrowing her eyes. I've had practice. The way he said it made her stomach twist. She didn't want to ask how many men he'd killed. She already knew the cost of survival didn't come clean. Outside, the street had begun to shift. A door creaked open down the block. A woman pulling laundry in. A bark of a dog across town. Nothing out of the ordinary, and yet everything on edge. That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She sat by the window with the shotgun across her lap, lantern low, her eyes burning with the memory of how silence used to mean peace, and now only meant something was lurking. Samuel paced for hours. At one point he stopped beside her and said, I buried one of 'em on the trail out of Red Valley, thought I'd bought myself time, but I think that's what made them chase harder. They ain't hunting gold, they're hunting punishment. Then they won't stop. No. Outside, clouds gathered. A storm threatened but held. Ruth's shoulders ached from tension, but she didn't let go. Couldn't. Her babies were somewhere across town, huddled in Frank Maddox's jailhouse office, waiting for dawn like it was a promise. Dawn came, pale, dusty, a thin line of orange cutting through the horizon. And with it came hooves. Samuel was already outside by the time she roused. She grabbed her shawl, stepped out onto the porch and froze. There were 6 riders on the ridge. No dust trail, no noise, just silhouettes lined against the sun like specters. They didn't move, not yet, just watched. They're waiting, Samuel said, trying to see who's watching back. Ruth raised the barrel of the shotgun slightly. I am, she said. They stood there all morning. The sheriff came by just after breakfast, Caleb close behind him. Ruth met them both on the porch. Frank Maddox, old and grim-eyed, nodded once as he took in the sight of the riders. He said nothing, just checked his pistol, then turned to her. How bad? Bad. He nodded again. Told my boys to be ready. We'll line the rooftops by noon. And the children? Safe but spooked. Good, keep them inside. She didn't need to say which one she meant. He understood. But even with Frank and his deputies, even with her sons back beside her before midday, even with every able-bodied man in town holding a rifle, the riders didn't move. They just waited. By sundown, nerves were tight enough to snap. Samuel hadn't spoken since noon. He sat on the edge of the porch now, whittling a stick to nothing. His hands were shaking. I don't think they're coming tonight, he said. No, Ruth agreed, tomorrow. How do you know? Because they want fear first. They want us guessing, sleeping light. Then we let them sleep even lighter. Ruth turned to him. What's that mean? Samuel stood. Means I ride out tonight, draw them away or draw them in. You'll die. Maybe, but it'll be me, not you. She looked at him for a long time. And if you fail, it's us anyway. He didn't answer. She didn't want his sacrifice. Not yet, not unless it mattered. The town held its breath that night. The 6 riders remained. Still. Watching. Waiting. And Ruth knew, deep in her marrow, that whatever happened next, whatever vengeance or justice or reckoning was owed, it would come before the week was through. The second night dragged itself across the prairie like a dying animal, heavy and slow and full of things unsaid. Ruth didn't sleep. Neither did Samuel. They sat on opposite ends of the porch, watching the hill like it might move if they blinked too long. The riders had disappeared just after dusk, slipped off like ghosts dissolving into the dark, but everyone knew they were still there. Waiting. Testing. The town grew quieter, doors bolted. Lanterns dimmed early. The air tasted of fear and dry wood smoke. Ruth kept her shotgun loaded and ready across her lap, thumb brushing the cool steel barrel. She didn't trust silence anymore, not after all these years. Silence never meant peace. It meant something worse was listening. She heard the soft creak of the door behind her and turned to see Clara standing barefoot in the doorway, her nightgown wrinkled, her curls matted from sleep. She was 7, too old to be bobbied but too young to be dragged into the weight of this world. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. "I had a dream," Clara whispered. "There was fire and you weren't there." Ruth's voice was steady as she set the shotgun down. "Come here, baby." Clara padded over and climbed into her lap. Ruth wrapped her arms around her daughter's small frame, holding tight like she could anchor her against all the things she couldn't control. Samuel watched, silent, his face unreadable in the shadows. "I'm here," Ruth murmured into Clara's hair. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara nodded sleepily, but her grip around her mother's neck never loosened. After a while, Ruth stood and carried her inside. She laid her down on the pallet beside Jonah and kissed her forehead. Both boys stirred but didn't wake. She sat beside them for a long moment, fingers brushing their hair, her heart a steady, wounded drum. When she returned to the porch, Samuel hadn't moved. He was carving again, small curls of wood piling at his feet. She sat beside him, and for a while neither spoke. "She looks like you," he said finally. Ruth didn't answer. "I see it more now," he went on. "In her eyes, that fire, you always had it." "She's her own girl," Ruth said quietly. "She didn't get it from me. She got it from needing it." He nodded, Caleb strong. "He had to be." "And Jonah." Ruth hesitated. "Jonah's the one I worry about most. He's got more questions than answers. He holds things inside like they'll crush the rest of us if he lets them out." Samuel looked down at his hands. "That's familiar." "It should be." She didn't say more. Didn't need to. They sat together until the first edge of dawn cracked the horizon. The riders hadn't returned yet, but that only made the air feel tighter, like they were holding the town in a fist, waiting for it to beg. By mid-morning, Frank Maddox called a meeting in the church. A dozen men came, rifles slung over shoulders, faces pinched and tired. Ruth left Samuel with the children and went alone. The church pews creaked under the weight of worry. Frank stood near the pulpit, arms crossed, eyes on the floor like the wood might offer strategy. "They're waiting us out," he said, "trying to see if we'll break first. I don't like it." "They ain't bandits," one man muttered. "They're trained, tight formation, sharp eyes." "They're hunting," another whispered. Ruth stood. "Then we make them think we're prey until it's too late." The room quieted. Frank raised an eyebrow. "You suggesting we set bait?" "I'm suggesting we use the fact that they're watching. Let them see what they want to see." "And what's that?" "A family, scared, disarmed, unprotected. I reopen the store. Let 'em think we're pretending it's over. Then tomorrow when they move, we're ready." A long pause. "They'll take the bait," Frank said. "They will," Ruth said. "They didn't ride all this way to stare at us." By afternoon, the store was open. the sign back to open. Ruth moved like nothing had changed, restocking shelves, setting out flowers, sweeping the porch. Samuel worked beside her, quieter now but not hiding. Caleb stood at the door, broom in hand, pretending to be a boy doing chores. His eyes never left the street. Jonah sat on the porch, carving a stick. Clara braided scraps of yarn into her doll's hair. All the while, Ruth's heart beat a single, terrible rhythm. They are coming, they are coming. And by evening they did. At first it was one rider. He came down the ridge like a man out for a stroll, hat low, coat flapping lazily. He didn't speak as he entered the street, just rode to the trough near the store and let his horse drink. Samuel stepped onto the porch, his revolver hidden behind his coat. The rider dismounted slowly, tied his reins, then turned toward the store and smiled. "You must be Ruth." She didn't answer. "Name S. Silas," he said. "We rode with your man a while, been looking for him." "You found him." Silas smiled wider. "I see that. Mind if I come in?" "Yes," she said. The smile faltered just slightly. "You sure? I'm not here for trouble, not yet anyway." Samuel stepped forward. "You got business with me, Silas." Silas looked him over. "Sure do. Boss says you owe him." "I paid what I owed." "You paid yourself, that's different." Ruth spoke before Samuel could. "You don't want a war here. This is a good town, good people." Silas's grin returned. "Then hand him over and we'll leave the good people alone." "That simple?" she asked. He shrugged. "It can be." Samuel took a slow step forward. "If I come with you, it won't stop there. I know your boss. He don't just collect, he punishes." Silas said nothing. Ruth looked between them. Then softly she said, "Go back to your camp. Tell your men they've got 1 day. After that, we're not talking anymore." Silas laughed. "1 day, lady, we could take this town by sundown." "Then why haven't you?" she asked. He blinked. "You're waiting. You're scared. You've never seen a town that fights back, have you?" His smile fell completely now. "I'll tell my men," he said, "and tomorrow we'll see who's scared." He mounted his horse, turned, and rode off. Ruth didn't move until the dust settled. "Why didn't you let me shoot him?" Caleb asked, stepping beside her. "Because he came to talk," she said. "You don't shoot the first man who talks, you shoot the last one." That night they prepared. Frank and his men lined rooftops with rifles. Jonah helped melt wax to seal cartridges. Clara wrote letters she didn't understand to be mailed if they didn't make it. Ruth cleaned every weapon in the house twice. Samuel packed 2 bags, one for running, one for staying. He never said which he intended to use. By dawn they heard the hoofbeats. All 6 this time. Riding slow. Confident. Like they expected to find the town, folded and afraid. They didn't. Ruth stood on the porch with her shotgun across her arms, Samuel beside her, Caleb on the roof, Frank Maddox at the end of the street, eyes narrowed behind a rifle scope. The 6 riders spread out, flanking the street, Silas in the center. He didn't smile this time. "This your answer?" he called. "It is," Ruth replied. "Then so be it." He reached for his gun. But Ruth moved first. The first shot wasn't hers, not really. She pulled the trigger, yes, the crack of her shotgun rolling through town like thunder, but it was the town itself that answered. The moment the blast split the morning quiet, rifles fired from rooftops, echoing across the storefronts and into the distant hills. Glass shattered in the saloon. A horse screamed. A body hit dirt. Chaos came quick, sharp, loud. Ruth reloaded before the first shell even hit the floor. Her fingers moved on instinct now, guided by years of muscle memory, not fear. Samuel was already firing from beside her, his revolver barking in sharp rhythm, every shot deliberate. Beside the trough, one of the Red Valley riders dropped backward off his horse, his body jerking as he hit the ground. Frank Maddox's men answered from above. 2 riders tried to flank the general store, but Caleb had moved to the west roof with the best angle. Ruth saw the flicker of his barrel, the flash, and one of the flanking horses stumbled, its rider pitched sideways. Jonah and Clara were inside, safe under floorboards lined with old quilts. Ruth had kissed them both before dawn, promising she'd come back, promising she'd make it right. Now she didn't think about them. She couldn't. Fear blurred your vision, and she couldn't afford blur. The second rider reached the porch. Samuel stepped in front of her without hesitation, pulling a second revolver from beneath his coat. The man came at them swinging from his saddle with a machete, too close for a clean shot. Samuel ducked as the blade came down, fired twice into the rider's gut, and shoved him backward with a grunt. Blood sprayed the steps. 3 down, Samuel shouted, breath ragged. 3 to go, Ruth replied. But then the sound shifted. The remaining riders weren't retreating. They were regrouping. Across the street, Silas dismounted behind the saloon, dragging a wounded man with him. Ruth ducked as bullets shattered a window above her head. She rolled behind a rain barrel and chambered another round, sweat burning in her eyes despite the cold morning air. Samuel crouched beside her, pressing his back to the wall. They're splitting, 2 around the side. Silas behind the bar. They'll push from 3 directions. How long can Frank hold them? Not long if they rush. A beat, then Ruth stood. We don't wait. What? We take the fight to them. Ruth, there's 6 of. There were 6, now there's 4. He looked at her for a long moment, not with the old gaze, not the one laced with guilt or longing or regret. Something new, respect. Then let's finish it. They moved together. Ruth peeled around the edge of the store while Samuel ducked through the back alley. Caleb called down from the rooftop, pointing toward movement behind the old stables. Ruth followed the signal and found herself staring straight into the face of the youngest Red Valley boy, barely more than a teen, with trembling hands and panic in his eyes. He raised his pistol too slow. She didn't. He hit the ground before he ever fired a shot. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't stop. Behind the stables, she saw the last 2 closing in, one with a rifle, the other with a knife in his boot and a grin like he was born to hurt. She waited until they passed her hiding place, then stepped out and fired. One went down screaming. The other turned too fast, lost his footing on the ice-slick mud, and Ruth tackled him before he could recover. They rolled in the dirt. His knife slashed across her sleeve, slicing fabric and skin. She punched him hard enough to rattle his teeth and slammed the butt of her shotgun into his temple. He went limp. She staggered upright, panting. Gunfire had slowed. Distant shouts now, Samuel yelling something, Caleb answering. She ran back toward the front of the store, boots thudding, shoulder bleeding. Silas was there. Standing in the middle of the street like the battle hadn't touched him at all, one revolver still in his hand, another tucked into his belt. And he had Clara. Ruth froze. The child stood in front of him, his arm across her shoulders like a shield. Her face was pale but defiant. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just looked at Ruth. Like she knew her mother wouldn't fail her. Samuel came running from the other side, but stopped short when he saw Silas's gun shift toward Clara's head. Drop it, Silas called. Samuel obeyed, revolver falling into the dust. Ruth, Silas said, you've made this real hard. All we wanted was a quiet transaction. You murdered 3 people. He shrugged, that's business. You touch my daughter, and I will end you. You'll try. Ruth didn't blink, didn't breathe. She took one slow step forward. You're not gonna shoot her, she said softly. Wanna bet? She's worth more alive than dead. You kill her, you've got nothing. But let her go and maybe, you limp out of here. Silas considered her. His grip shifted slightly. And that's when Caleb fired. A single shot. From the roof of the store. Straight through Silas's shoulder. The outlaw cried out and stumbled backward, his grip loosening. Clara ducked low and ran to Ruth's arms. Ruth caught her, pulled her close, turned, and shielded her daughter as Frank Maddox charged from behind the jailhouse and tackled Silas to the ground. The two men grappled, fists flying, and then Samuel was there too, kicking the gun from Silas's hand and pinning his arm. It was over in minutes. The last of the Red Valley gang lay bleeding, bound or dead. The silence that followed was deep and wide. Ruth held Clara tight. Frank stood over Silas, breathing hard. "You'll hang." Silas spit blood. "You ain't the law." "Today," Frank said, "I am." The townsfolk began to emerge, quiet, cautious. One by one, rifles lowered, breaths released. A few cheered, most just stood in awe, of Ruth, of Caleb, of a family that had faced down death and held their ground. By nightfall, the bodies were buried, the wounded treated, Silas locked in the jail, bloodied but alive. Ruth stood by the window of the store, watching the moon rise. Samuel approached quietly. "They won't come back, the rest of them, if there are any. They'll hear what happened here." She nodded. He hesitated. "I'll go tomorrow, head north, somewhere quiet." She didn't answer. Then, after a long pause, she said, "They asked me if I hated you." He waited. "I said no, hate's too easy, too small. What I felt, it was bigger than that, grief, anger, but under it all there was always a piece that wondered, why?" He sat on the step. "I left because I was afraid of not being enough, of turning into my own father, so I ran. And by the time I realized what I'd done, I didn't think I deserved to come back." Ruth didn't look at him. "You didn't." He nodded slowly. "But you did." A long silence. Clara peeked out from the curtain behind her. "Is he staying?" Ruth looked at Samuel. "I don't know yet," she said. Then closed the curtain gently. The fire inside crackled softly. But outside, in the cold and quiet, a new question had begun to rise, unspoken but felt in every heartbeat. If survival had been the only goal, what now? What did a family do with peace? And was there a future for the man who had come home too late, but still in time? Ruth didn't sleep that night. Even with the town quiet and the blood scrubbed from the dirt road, even with the lanterns out and her children tucked safe in bed, sleep refused her. She sat by the fire, arms folded back straight, watching shadows flicker against the walls like ghosts called in by silence. Samuel had taken the cot near the window. He hadn't asked. She hadn't offered. He just laid down without a word and closed his eyes like a man used to waiting in borrowed places. His revolver rested beneath his coat on the floor within reach, but his boots were off. That alone said something. She stared at him for a long while, remembering how he'd looked when he left, taller somehow, more reckless, more sure of everything. Now he looked like a man who'd found the edge of something and turned back. It didn't make her heart soften. It didn't wash away years, but it made the silence feel less jagged between them. Jonah woke first the next morning. He padded into the main room barefoot, rubbing his eyes and blinking at the low light. Ruth reached out and pulled him into her lap. He didn't say anything, just rested there a long while with his head on her chest. She stroked his hair gently. "Is he gonna leave again?" Jonah asked finally. Ruth didn't answer right away. "I don't know." Jonah nodded like that made sense. "He said I was brave." "You are." "He said I reminded him of someone." Ruth paused. "Who?" "Me," Samuel said quietly from the cot. His eyes were open now, gaze steady. "He reminded me of myself when I still thought I could be good." Ruth stiffened, but Jonah looked up, studying the man who'd spoken. "But you did something bad." Samuel sat up slowly. "I did. I left when I shouldn't have. I thought your mama would be better off without me. I thought I wasn't strong enough to be a father." "Are you now?" Samuel gave a sad smile. I'm trying to be. Jonah looked at Ruth. Can we let him try? Ruth didn't answer, not in front of Jonah, not yet. She kissed the top of his head instead and whispered, Go get dressed. It's a school day. Jonah groaned but obeyed, feet thumping back down the hallway. Ruth stood and poured a tin of coffee. Samuel waited quietly until she handed him a cup. I meant what I said, he said softly. About being good. About trying. She nodded, not in agreement but acknowledgement. We both know trying doesn't change the past. No, he said, but it might build a future. They sat in silence, coffee warming their hands. Caleb emerged a few minutes later, stoic as always, but Ruth caught the way his eyes scanned the room, assessing, noting where everyone stood. He moved like her, careful, aware, always half expecting something to fall apart. Frank Maddox stopped by around noon. He stepped in, doffed his hat, and glanced between Ruth and Samuel with a weariness that spoke of too many years and too few good endings. Got word this morning, he said, taking a seat at the counter. Telegraph came through. Red Valley gang S done. Word of the shootout spread already. Silas has kin down in Brazos. One of 'em wired the sheriff to confirm he's in custody. Folks are saying justice finally came to the frontier. Ruth folded a cloth on the counter. There's no justice in burying bodies, just endings. Frank nodded. Even so, it means you're safe for now. Samuel leaned forward. And me. You're lucky the town likes Ruth, Frank said flatly, and that you stood your ground. Lot of men wouldn't have, but you pull another stunt, you're gone, understand? I do. Frank nodded. There's a room at Widow Macri's boarding house. Clean, quiet, you pay rent, you stay. You don't, well, you ride out. Samuel glanced at Ruth. Your idea. No, she said, but I didn't stop it either. Frank stood. Town S giving you one shot, Samuel. Don't make us regret it. After Frank left, Samuel didn't say anything. He finished his coffee and stood, stretching. I'll head over, don't want to be underfoot. You were underfoot the moment you came back, Ruth said. Whether you stay or not doesn't change that. He paused. You want me to go? She didn't answer. He picked up his coat and walked out without pressing. That, at least, earned a sliver of respect. That night Ruth found herself alone again. The children were asleep. The fire burned low. The window creaked with wind. She stood staring at the shelf where Samuel's old boots had once sat, back when they were newlyweds, back before the war in him had started. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years, but something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Just the weight of memory making room for something else. The next day Samuel came by with bread and sugar. He didn't linger. Just left it on the stoop with a note. Didn't think you had time to fetch supplies. Thought I'd help. Ruth watched him from the window, but didn't open the door. The day after, he returned with a hammer and nails. Repaired the loose board on the porch, fixed the fence Caleb had meant to get to, mended the back gate. Still didn't ask for anything. By the end of the week, Jonah had started asking if Pa was coming for supper. Ruth always said no, but the word stuck. It was dangerous, that word. It had roots. Caleb said little, but Ruth noticed the way he stood closer when Samuel was near. Not like a son, not yet, but not like a stranger either. Then Sunday came. The town gathered at the chapel, thin pews, dusty windows, a hymnal out of tune. Ruth hadn't gone in weeks, not since Clara had taken sick and Ruth had stayed home to boil water. But this time she felt pulled, like something unfinished waited inside. She wore her plain blue dress, tied her hair back, held Clara's hand while Caleb walked beside her, tall and stiff in his Sunday shirt. Jonah bounded ahead, chasing a beetle near the steps. Samuel stood at the chapel doors. He wore a clean shirt, borrowed no doubt, and boots someone had polished for him. He didn't approach, just nodded once when their eyes met. Ruth held his gaze for a breath, then walked past him into the pews. The preacher spoke on mercy that morning, about how grace wasn't something you earned, it was something you chose to give. Ruth stared at the cracked wood beneath her hands and listened hard. After the service, the town spilled out into the sunlight. Folks nodded at her, a few smiled. One woman offered Clara a sweet. Caleb spoke to a boy his age near the well. Samuel waited across the square. Jonah ran to him. "Can we go fishing soon?" the boy asked. "I heard there's trout up near the bend." Samuel smiled. "If your mama says so." Jonah looked back at Ruth, who stood frozen on the steps. She didn't nod, but she didn't shake her head either. It was a beginning. That afternoon, Ruth sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. Samuel came by with a reel and a box of nails. He didn't ask to stay. He just fixed a loose shutter, then started whittling again on the steps. "Don't you have a room?" she asked finally. He smiled. "I do, but it's quieter here." She raised an eyebrow. "You think you belong here now?" "I think I want to." They sat in silence. The light shifted, the breeze changed. "I hated you," Ruth said suddenly, voice flat. "I know. I wanted you dead. I figured. But you came back." "I did. For them." He nodded. "And for you." She didn't speak again for a long while. Then she whispered, "It's not that easy." "I don't want it easy," he said. "I want it real." The screen door creaked. Clara appeared with a blanket and climbed into Ruth's lap. "Mama," she asked, "are we gonna keep him?" Ruth looked at Samuel. "I don't know," she said. But she didn't send him away. And that night when she watched him walk back to Widow Macri's boarding house, her heart ached, not with grief, but with something else. Hope. A slow, stubborn, dangerous kind of hope. The kind that only grows where pain once lived. The kind that doesn't fade easy. It had been 3 weeks since the guns went quiet. 3 weeks of cautious mornings and 2 quiet evenings, of hammering fences and patching roofs and pretending that peace came easy. Ruth Cooper had survived too much to believe the world had changed overnight. Even now, with Samuel returning small and steady, bringing flour, fixing gates, helping Caleb muck the barn, she kept a ledger in her mind. Not of favors or chores, but of time. How many nights without him? How many years? How many mornings she'd pulled on boots alone, or boiled water with one arm while cradling a fevered child in the other. You didn't erase that. You didn't forgive it quickly. But the children were different. Clara had begun slipping her hand into Samuel's without looking first. Jonah followed him like a shadow through the fields, asking questions about rabbits and traps and why some people left and others stayed. And Caleb watched, not with the wide-eyed hope of the others, but with that sharp, guarded gaze he'd inherited from Ruth herself. He was waiting for the break, for Samuel to stumble or disappear again. Ruth saw it in every stiff nod, every half-answered question. Her eldest didn't trust easily. That was her fault, or maybe her gift. One afternoon, as the sky glowed a dusty gold and the wind came warm from the south, Ruth found herself standing by the old barn fence, watching Samuel and Caleb repair the east gate together. They moved in rhythm, hammer and hold, lift and nail. Caleb didn't speak much, but he didn't walk away either. That was something. Frank Maddox approached from the road, hat low over his brow. He leaned against the post beside Ruth and squinted toward the field. "Looks like he's staying." Ruth didn't respond. Frank chewed on his thoughts a moment. "He's not a bad man, just one who made a bad choice." "They always start that way," Ruth muttered. "You're not wrong," Frank adjusted his hat. "But people change, or they try to, up to you whether you let 'em." Ruth watched as Samuel handed Caleb a new length of board, his voice quiet, patient. "He's trying," she admitted. "Then let him." That night when Samuel knocked gently on the back door, Ruth didn't make him stand outside long. She opened the screen, leaned in the frame and waited. "I'm not asking to come back inside," he said. "Good. But I am asking for a favor." She raised an eyebrow. "I want to take Caleb out past the ridge. There's a ridge line with an old stream bed and trout this time of year," he asked. "Figured I should ask you." Ruth looked over her shoulder, saw Caleb's boots by the hearth. "How long?" "Half a day back by dusk." She hesitated. "If you leave him out there, Samuel." "I won't." She studied him. "I'll pack lunch," she said. The next morning came warm and clear. Samuel saddled the gelding with practiced hands while Caleb filled the canteen and loaded his pocket knife. Ruth wrapped cornbread and jerky in wax paper, tucking in an apple for each of them. "You remember how to get there?" she asked Caleb. He nodded. "Don't drink from the stream. Make sure you boil the water before you refill the canteen." "I know, Mama." "Keep your eyes sharp, stay together, and if you don't come back by dark." "We will," Samuel promised. Ruth didn't say goodbye. She just handed Caleb the lunch bundle and stepped back, watching them ride off toward the hills. The image burned in her like something she wasn't ready to feel. By midday, the house was too quiet. Clara helped knead dough in the kitchen while Jonah gathered eggs, but Ruth moved through the day like her boots had grown heavier. Every distant echo made her turn. Every shifting wind made her heart clench. She didn't like this letting go, but it wasn't about comfort. It was about trust. She'd built too many walls around herself to knock them all down at once, so she waited. And when dusk came and the first shape appeared over the ridge, 2 shadows against a bruised sky, she didn't breathe until both horses cleared the crest. They returned laughing. Caleb had caught 2 fish and Samuel none. He was telling Clara all about it, holding up the gutted trout like trophies, while Samuel trailed behind, tired but content. "Thanks for the food," Caleb said, handing her the empty satchel. Ruth took it, eyes locked on her son's flushed cheeks, the way his shoulders had relaxed. "You did good," she said softly. He blinked, then in a rare move stepped forward and hugged her. It was quick, a rush of arms and warmth, and then he was gone, racing Jonah around the coop. Samuel lingered on the porch. "I didn't expect that," he said. "Neither did I." "She's strong," he added, nodding toward Clara. "She had to be." He stepped closer. "And you?" Ruth looked at him, still deciding. That night she couldn't sleep again. This time it wasn't fear, it was something quieter, sadder, like all the grief she'd been too busy to feel had finally come knocking. She stood by the window watching the moon cast silver across the yard and remembered a time when Samuel's shadow had been the one beside hers in the dark. He hadn't changed much, not really, but she had. That was the part no one warned you about, that the wounds didn't just scar, they reshaped you. The next week brought news. A telegram came through from the sheriff in Brazos. Silas had died in custody. Infection, they said. The town didn't mourn. They didn't celebrate either. They just moved on as towns do. But Ruth felt it. A thread had snapped, one more tether to the past gone. Samuel read the wire at the counter and folded it slowly. "I should leave," he said. Ruth looked up. "I came here because they were after me, because I put you all in danger. Now that it's over, maybe I've worn out my welcome." Ruth's jaw tensed. "Is that what you think this has been?" He didn't answer. "You're not a stray dog, Samuel. You don't come and go as the wind shifts." "Then what am I?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but you're not done." He stayed. Not because she asked, not because the town needed him. Because this time he chose to. And slowly, so slowly it hurt, things shifted. He fixed the roof with Caleb, built a shelf for Clara's dolls, showed Jonah how to carve a whistle from pine. Ruth watched it all from the edges, careful, measured, but unable to deny the change. He never pressed, never asked for forgiveness. He just kept showing up. One morning, weeks later, Ruth opened the store early and found Samuel already there, sorting the new shipment. He looked up, surprised. "You're early." "Couldn't sleep." He nodded. "Coffee?" She hesitated, then finally said yes. They sat together on the porch as the sun lifted gold across the ridge. She sipped the tin cup, silent. "I dreamed about you," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You were wearing that blue dress, standing by the river. I tried to reach you, but the current kept pulling me back." She didn't answer. "I wanted to say I'm sorry again, for everything, but I know it doesn't change things." "No," she said, "it doesn't." He nodded, still had to say it. She set down her cup. "You left me to raise 3 children alone, Samuel. You left when Clara wasn't even walking. I buried my mother without you. Buried a baby girl you never met. There's no fixing that, not ever." He blinked, pain rising in his throat. "But," she said, voice breaking, "you came back, and every day since you've done right." She stood, her gaze steady. "That doesn't mean I trust you, doesn't mean I forgive you, but it means I see you trying, and I see the children need you." He stood too. "Do you?" She held his gaze. "I think I might." The wind picked up. In the distance, thunder rolled. And just like that, something shifted in the air. Not the weather, not the season. Something deeper. Like the beginning of something they hadn't dared name. Yet, it was the kind of morning that looked peaceful from the porch but never felt that way deep down. Ruth stood just outside the store, broom in hand, sweeping dust in slow, thoughtful strokes while the town woke behind her. Jonah's laughter echoed from behind the mercantile where he and Clara were chasing chickens through the alley. Caleb was down by the river with Samuel, learning how to mend a net. The sun was warm on her shoulders, but her chest held something cold, unmoving, like the last patch of winter that hadn't yet melted. She had told herself this wouldn't happen, that she'd never fall into rhythm again, not with him. But rhythm had a way of creeping back into things, into footsteps, habits, even silence. The children no longer flinched when he spoke. They sought him out now, drifted toward him like leaves to a steady current. He wasn't trying to replace anything, not anymore. He was just there, present, constant, and that's what scared her most. Frank Maddox stepped up beside her, quiet as always. "Looks like they're mending nets and fences." Ruth didn't look at him. "Don't mean they'll hold." "No," Frank agreed, "but it means they're trying." She paused, brushing a stubborn clump of dirt from the steps. "You didn't come here to talk about fishing." "No," Frank glanced up the street. "Got a wire from Ellensburg." That made her look at him. Outlaw crew hit a relay station 2 towns over. Same Mark Silas's gang used, same tactics too. Might be someone picking up where he left off. Ruth's stomach tightened. "You think they'll come here?" "Doubt it, but Samuel was their tie to Silas. That still matters to someone." "He's not part of that anymore." "I believe you," Frank turned to her, "but I need to know he's not gonna draw fire here again." Ruth set the broom down. "He's not that man anymore." Frank nodded. "I hope you're right for everyone's sake." She watched him go, then glanced toward the river. She could just make out Caleb's silhouette, standing beside his father. Samuel's hand rested on the boy's shoulder, guiding him through the net's weave. It was a picture she'd imagined once, years ago, before everything broke. That night, Ruth sat on the porch with Samuel while the children slept inside. The stars above were thick as spilled salt, and the night air carried the scent of pine and river reeds. Frank's words lingered. "They're saying someone's trying to carry on Silas's work," she said finally. Samuel didn't move. "You think they'll come here?" he asked. "I don't know." He leaned back, arms folded. "If they do, I'll be ready. You brought this to our door once already." "I know. You say you've changed." "I have." She looked at him, then prove it. I'm still here, all right. That's not enough, Samuel. He turned to face her, his voice low. Then tell me what is. She didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because part of her still feared what came next. Trust was harder than survival, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, demanded more than most people had to give. A week passed. Then another. Summer stretched wide across the valley, and the rhythm continued. Mornings at the shop, afternoons in the field. Ruth caught herself humming sometimes as she shelved canned peaches or folded burlap sacks. She stopped checking the horizon every morning, stopped bracing for noise in the night. Until the stranger rode into town. It was a quiet Tuesday. The sun had just crested past noon, and Ruth was counting inventory when the air shifted. She felt it more than saw it, like a chill slipping under the skin. The man was tall, bone-thin, and wrapped in a black coat that looked too heavy for summer. His horse was lathered in sweat. He rode with the kind of patience that made men nervous, not slow, not fast, just inevitable. Frank was the first to greet him. The sheriff stepped off the porch of the jailhouse, thumb resting just beside his belt buckle. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did the rider. Then the stranger smiled. I'm looking for someone, he said, voice like gravel. You'll have to be more specific, Frank replied. Name S. Samuel, used to run with Sela's crow. Frank didn't blink. A lot of men used to run with Sela's. Most of them are dead now. Samuel ain't. The man's grin widened. And I've got something that belongs to him. Ruth stepped out of the shop just in time to see the man reach into his coat and drop something in the dirt. It landed with a soft thunk, a child's carved wooden horse. Her heart stopped. Samuel had whittled it 2 weeks ago for Clara. She'd lost it behind the barn last Thursday. The man met her eyes and tipped his hat. Ma'am. Frank stepped between them fast. That's close enough. The stranger held up his hands. No trouble, just want a word. Ruth turned and ran. She found Samuel behind the shed, hammer in hand, shirt soaked with sweat. There's a man in town, she said, breathless. He's asking for you. Samuel froze. Tall black coat. She nodded. He dropped the hammer and moved past her without a word. By the time he reached the main road, Frank was facing off with the rider, and 3 more men had appeared from the trees. They weren't armed openly, but Ruth saw the bulges at their hips, the rifles slung low. Jonah and Clara peeked from behind the porch rail, wide-eyed. Samuel, the man called. Heard you went soft. Samuel stepped forward. Rider. The man chuckled. Still remember my name, that's sweet. Didn't think you. Crawl out from under Silas's corpse. Ryder shrugged. We all need something to believe in. Me, I believe in debt, and you owe me. I walked away. You left us. Ryder's voice rose. You left when we needed you. Silas died. The others scattered. You think you can just live out here with your pretty little family like none of it matters. It doesn't, Samuel said flatly. Not anymore. That's where you're wrong. Ryder pointed to the children. It matters, because now I get to decide how this ends. Frank's hand hovered near his revolver. Town doesn't want trouble. Town doesn't get a choice. Samuel stepped forward. You want me? Fine, leave them out of it. Ryder smiled. That's the problem with men like you, Sam. You think this is about you. It's not. It's about what happens when ghosts come back wearing new names. I'm just here to remind everyone you don't get to start over, not without cost. Frank's voice cut through the rising tension. You can leave now, or stay and find out what happens when you test a town that's done burying its sons. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang. Ryder looked around slowly, then tipped his head. All right, he said, we'll go for now. He turned his horse. But I'll be back, and next time I won't just be looking for Samuel. I'll be looking for all of you. They rode out. Dust followed in their wake like smoke from a slow-burning fuse. That night the town was restless. Mothers locked windows. Men cleaned their guns. And Ruth stood in her kitchen, arms crossed, staring at the man who had once left her to raise their children alone. "You said it was over." "I thought it was." "You were wrong." Samuel nodded. "I'll go," he said. "Ride out, lead them away." "And do what?" she snapped. "Die out there." "I'd rather die than bring war back to your door." She stepped forward. "You think that makes you noble? It makes you the same coward you were when you left." He flinched. "You don't get to walk out again. Not this time. You stay, you stand. And if they come, we face them together. Do you understand me?" He looked at her like she was something sacred and furious, and more than he'd ever deserved. "I do," he said. And he meant it. Because this time, Ruth Cooper wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to protect the family she'd built with blood and grit and nights spent praying to a sky that never answered. She didn't need saving. She needed standing beside. And Samuel Hargrove, for the first time in his life, understood what that meant. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. The storm hadn't come yet. But it was close. The days that followed held the hush of a storm too big to name. Even when the skies stayed clear and the dirt roads warm underfoot, the air crackled with waiting. Children played closer to home. Men stayed near their rifles, even in the church pews. The saloon emptied by sundown, and every eye, even the quiet ones, followed Samuel Hargrove wherever he went. Ruth felt it in her bones. That old, restless whisper that had shadowed her since the day he rode away, the whisper that said, "Don't get too still. Don't believe in peace." But belief had crept in anyway, one quiet meal at a time, one fence post, one hand brushing the back of hers at the dinner table. It had been soft, that belief, tentative. Now it felt reckless. Because Ryder would return. And this time, he'd bring more than warnings. Frank Maddox called a town meeting. He stood in the center of the church, coat open, star polished, eyes sharper than usual. "We all know why we're here," he began. "The man who rode in last week, Ryder, has ties to Selah's Crow's old crew, and Samuel Hargrove." Eyes turned to Samuel, who stood near the back, hat in hand, spine straight. "Ryder's not just looking to settle a grudge," Frank continued. "He's making a move. Taking towns one at a time, for money, for fear, for control. We've seen it before. We won't see it again here." A murmur of agreement rolled through the room. "So we prepare," Frank said. "We post lookouts on the ridge. We move the children into the church at night. We don't let him surprise us." Someone stood. Mrs. Ellery, widow, 70, sharper than anyone gave her credit for. "And Samuel," she asked plainly, "what do we do with him?" Silence fell. Samuel lifted his head. "You do what you think is right," he said, "but I'm not running, not again." Another voice spoke, this time Ruth's. "He's not the man who left," she said. "He's not the man Ryder's trying to provoke. He's ours now." No one argued. Not out loud. Preparations began at once. Caleb helped reinforce the barn walls with planks salvaged from an old bridge. Jonah fetched nails and hauled water. Clara packed biscuits and salt pork into sacks Ruth tied with trembling fingers. Samuel spent his days riding the perimeter with Frank, mapping trails, marking high ground. At night he slept in the spare room. Ruth heard him moving sometimes, quietly, turning pages in the dark or just sitting. One night she found him standing in the kitchen, watching the moon. "You thinking about leaving again?" she asked. He shook his head. "I'm thinking about staying, even if it kills me." She stepped beside him. "I'm tired of losing things, Samuel. I'm tired of being what gets lost." They stood in silence until Clara's soft voice called from her room, and Ruth left him there in the pale light. The attack came at dawn. It wasn't loud at first, just hooves faint but fast, then a crack of gunfire somewhere near the West Ridge. Ruth was already up, tying Jonah's boots when the bell rang once, then twice, sharp and clear. Samuel burst through the back door, eyes wild. "They're here." Ruth didn't flinch. She handed him the rifle he'd stashed behind the door. "Take Caleb, get to the roof of the store, you'll see the whole street. And you. I'll be right behind you." He nodded, kissed her without asking, and ran. Clara clung to Ruth's skirt. Jonah grabbed her hand. Together they slipped into the cellar beneath the store, the one Frank had cleared 2 days before. Other families had gathered there, eyes wide, breathing shallow. Above them the world shook. Ryder had brought 12 men. Some shot wild, more for show than aim, but a few were trained, ruthless. They fired into windows, lit torches. 2 tried to storm the jail, but Frank dropped them clean from his perch on the saloon roof. Samuel and Caleb covered the road. Ruth could hear the boy shouting positions, Samuel's voice low and steady in return. Then a scream, close, familiar. Ruth raced upstairs. She found Clara just outside the cellar door, clutching her doll, eyes wide with terror. "Someone's inside," she whispered. Gun drawn, Ruth opened the door slowly. A man stood at the far end of the basement, gun pointed at the cluster of families. His hat was gone, hair wild, mouth twisted in a grin that didn't match his eyes. "Back off," Ruth ordered. He turned. "You must be the one he left behind." She didn't answer. He raised his weapon. She didn't hesitate. 1 shot. The man dropped. Silence swallowed the room. Ruth stood there, gun smoking, breath steady. "You're safe now," she said. The tide turned quickly after that. Frank's men pushed them from the east. Samuel and Caleb picked off stragglers from the rooftops. Ruth joined the street fight, rifle braced, eyes sharp. Ryder didn't go down easily. He made it to the church steps before Samuel stepped into his path. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," Ryder snarled. "You did," Samuel replied. "I just came back different." They circled each other like old wolves. Ryder fired first, missed. Samuel didn't. His bullet caught Ryder just below the collarbone. The man staggered, dropped to his knees, and coughed blood into the dust. "Go ahead," Ryder wheezed. "Be the man you always pretended to be." Samuel lowered his weapon. "I already am." And with that it ended. Bodies were buried in the hills. Wounds were stitched. Fires were put out, shelves restocked, but nothing returned to normal. Because normal had changed. Caleb took to fixing things, doors, hinges, broken fences. Jonah carved his first figure from pine and gave it to Clara, who placed it beside her doll, and told no one she slept easier with it there. Ruth cleaned the blood from the store floor and painted the porch anew. Samuel didn't leave. He built a coop for new chickens, fixed the roof of the church, read stories to Clara at night, helped Jonah with his handwriting, and sparred gently with Caleb in the backyard, always letting the boy win just enough to keep trying. One quiet evening, Ruth found him sitting by the garden, hands covered in soil. "Tomatoes," he said, "they're stubborn." "So am I," she replied. He looked up. "Do I stay?" She didn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward and handed him a trowel. "You already are." And under that same sky, broad and fierce and wild, something finally settled. Not peace, not forgiveness, but a beginning. A choice made not once but every day. And in the stillness that followed, after all the dust and blood and years between them, Ruth Cooper finally let herself believe in something more than survival. She believed in home.